Hey everybody, my name is Taylor Glenn and this is my channel Taylor Tries, where I try new things and I try to teach you new things. And today I'm going to teach you how to do a juggling trick called the factory. Before we jump into it, I want to take a second and thank everyone who is a member of my Otter Club over on Patreon. It's because of people like you that I'm able to make these tutorials as well as all my other content free for everyone else. So I really appreciate it. If you want to show support and become a member of my Otter Club on Patreon, there's a link in the description. For as little as $2 a month, it can really help me out. Plus, you also get an extended version of this tutorial where I'm going to teach you how to do the factory, but also how to do a two-sided version of it. If you want to learn that, it's only $2 and you can get access right now. Thanks again to all of the members of my Otter Club. The factory is such a fun trick. It's one of my favorites. It's also sometimes called the machine or even robot, but the most common term that I know for it is the factory. And basically the factory is a sort of columns variation where you're lifting a ball up over the top of the pattern and dropping it down, sort of like a mechanical factory arm that you would see in a factory. Hence why people call it the factory. The factory can be a little hard to wrap your head around, so in order to jump into this trick, I recommend that you already know the following tricks. Columns, as well as fake columns, specifically with your non-dominant hand being the up and down ball. If you feel like you have a pretty good handle on those tricks, we can go ahead and learn the factory. Why are my sleeves weird? I hope they haven't been like that the whole time. The factory is a really aesthetic trick and it's all about creating a particular look. The trick is supposed to look robotic. It's supposed to look very rigid. So let's take a second and figure out how we're gonna move the ball that's going up and across. The goal is to create a sort of upside down L with the ball that you are doing the factory with. I recommend having your non-dominant hand be the ball that is lifting because your other hand is going to be doing the majority of the actual juggling. So I find that having my non-dominant hand doing the upward part and my dominant hand juggling is the easiest way to do it. But we're gonna lift straight up just like we do in the fake columns. And I really want you to stop when you get to that point. We wanna create a very harsh line here. And then from here, we're gonna go over. Get used to that idea of creating a stop and then over. Now, the reason I want you to get comfortable with one ball is because a lot of people tend to sort of rush the factory and just try to get their hand over to that second point, and they completely miss that first point. It's very important that you stop here, go straight up and stop, and then bring the ball over to drop it. Do not make it one continuous motion. The factory should look very robotic, so we want to accentuate the stop at each one of those points. So you can practice this either by going up, over, back, down, and again focusing on that L shape, or you can go up, over, drop, which is what the actual trick does, and then just repeat it. Either way, the goal of this one ball exercise, no matter how silly it feels, is to get comfortable with that very sharp edge that we are creating with our hand. You might want to start paying attention now to how you're lifting this ball. A lot of people have a tendency to want to do it like this, and you're totally fine to do that. There's no rules, but I find that a better aesthetic, a better look of the trick happens when you keep your elbow in and you point the ball out so that people can see it. So you're not covering it in any way, and you're also not creating a weird monkey arm so that it does this. I mean, you can do that. It just looks different and it looks less like a factory in my opinion. So I tend to keep my elbow in and I try to point the ball out. This needs to be so ingrained in your muscle memory that you don't even have to think about it. Once you feel good with that, let's pick up a second ball. This is where the magic happens. So exciting. So we're gonna start with that same exercise. We're gonna bring our hand up and bring it over. But this time when you bring the ball over, at the same time I want you to be throwing this ball up. Now when you do, try to aim for the spot that your hand was before you brought it over. So that first point right here, we're going to throw this ball to that spot. Almost like a normal cascade throw, a sort of diagonal throw. From here, when this ball is in the air, we're going to wait a second, let the balls peak together, and then as this ball starts coming down, we're going to drop this ball and come over and grab that ball coming down. And again, you want to throw the ball to the first point that we hit. creating a sort of diagonal throw. And the reason we do that is because then it resets the trick to be shoulder width, and so we can repeat it over and over again. If we throw this ball straight up, it ends up kind of pushing the pattern continuously to the right, and you'll end up going in circles. So remember, when we're here, we're gonna throw this ball to that point. So they sort of switch sides. When you do this, you really want to make sure that that diagonal throw is not only hitting that point, but is also peaking about the same spot as where your hand is. You don't want it to be too high, and you also don't want it to be too low. If you do that, it's going to mess up the timing, and it's going to make it hard to maintain. Notice how I said that I want you to wait a second while these two balls are in the air before you drop the ball and grab the other one. This is really important. The factory is a lot slower than a lot of people think. You really don't want to rush any of the movements. So if you drag the ball over and immediately drop it, you're going to end up creating a very strange rhythm. There are 3 distinct beats in the pattern, and we want to hit each one and take our time with it. So we go 1, 2, 3. So avoid dropping that ball too quickly like this. See how different that looks and how much more chaotic it looks? It's also a lot harder because the rhythm gets out of control really quick. Wait as long as possible. That's how we create those really obvious points, and it makes it look more robotic. It's also a lot easier and makes the rhythm a lot easier to follow. So remember that it's a lot slower than you think. Take your time with this 2-ball exercise. Make each point very intentional. And when you feel good with that, we can move on to 3 balls. All right, here's where the trick gets a little bit harder, but you've got this. If you practice that 2-ball exercise, we're just gonna throw an extra throw in there. It's not even going to affect those 2 balls. So stay with me, let's do it. This is where I want you to really remember that fake columns trick that we did. That's the core of this trick. It's going to feel really similar right at the beginning. We're gonna do 1 ball up, and then we've got a fake column motion following that outside ball. So we have 1, 2, which you should be familiar with. Very nice. So from here, our hand is at that first point that we talked about in the 1-ball exercise. And instead of coming back down like we would in fake columns, we're gonna continue over with our factory movement. So we have 1, 2, 3. But instead of catching this ball, of course, we're going to throw that diagonal ball to hit that spot. So we're essentially doing that 2-ball exercise that we just did. And then you drop the ball, just like in the 2-ball exercise. So again, 1, 2, 3, stop. 1, 2, 3, catch. 1, 2, 3, catch. 1, 2, 3, catch. Do that a few times until you feel good with it. Now we just keep going. So instead of stopping and catching here, we're gonna throw 1 ball up in the middle, which is the first throw that we did in the sequence. It's this one. So we have 1, 1, 2, 3, 1. One, 2, 3, 1. Now from here, it's gonna repeat. So 1 is always gonna be 1 ball going straight up, 2 will be the lift to that first point, and then 3 is crossing over. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that's the factory. It looks super complicated. It's not that hard once you break it down. It's a lot like that fake columns trick. Make sure you break down steps 1, 2, and 3, and then you'll be able to do it. Now, I've taught a lot of people the factory, and I've seen a lot of the common mistakes that beginners make when trying to learn this trick. So I want to take a second and just break those down right now. So I highly encourage you to watch this section, because odds are you're probably having one of these mistakes, and it's gonna help you a lot if you can break those habits now. All right, so the first and biggest problem that I see people have is that they're not paying attention to those points. I talked about this briefly when we were doing the 1-ball exercise, but it now becomes a lot harder to do when you have 3 balls. People get so caught up trying to get to that second point that they miss the first one, and they end up sort of rushing to get there and not creating that accentuated look that we want. You really need to hit that first point and then bring it over to the second point. Sure, most of this is for the visual style of it. It looks better, but it also makes the trick a lot easier because it keeps you on rhythm. Every time you are moving this hand to hit one of those 3 points, you are also doing a throw. So it feels very synchronous. It's very rhythmic and it's very slow as a result. So we want to hit 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. When you start skipping that first point, you lose track really quick of which ball is supposed to be thrown versus caught versus dragged. So really make sure you hit that first point, lock it there for a second, then move it over with the next throw, again, because they should be happening at the same time. And then wait a second again, because you want to wait as long as possible before you drop that ball, come down and swipe the other one to that third point. Take it slow. The factory is slow. Hit those beats, wait at each one before you drag the ball to the next one. That's the most important thing that I see beginners have a hard time with. The next most common problem I see is that beginners will throw that ball that's supposed to kind of hit diagonally to that point. They'll throw it either too high or too low. So it ends up looking sort of like this. Or like this. If you're having a hard time with that ball either being too high or too low, go back to that 2-ball exercise and work on this again. But really focus on getting that throw to be around the same peak as where your hand is. If it's going too high, you've got a problem. If it's going too low, you also have got a problem. Try to aim for that same line so they're peaking together and creating this nice motion at the same time. Now, sort of related to that is another problem that I see where people tend to lift their hands too up and their pattern is up here. So they're trying to do a factory really high. Now, the factory is hard to do higher. It's a trick that benefits from bringing your hands down. So if you're a juggler who has a tendency to juggle up here, which you should be trying to train yourself out of because it's a bad habit, you're gonna have a hard time with the factory. So start bringing your hands down, have the base of your pattern down by your hips, not up by your chest. So if you have to, go back to practicing fake columns and focus on keeping the pattern lower as opposed to being up here. The higher that this hand is doing this column pattern, the higher this hand's gonna have to lift up. It's gonna become really hard really quick. So bring this pattern down, do your columns down here, and that way your factory can happen at the forehead level instead of way up high in the sky. Those are all the tips I have for you on the factory. I really hope this tutorial helped. I know a lot of people have asked me how to do this trick, and I hope I broke it down in a way that makes it a little easier to understand. Now, if you're really digging this trick and you want to learn another variation on it, there's a really fun one where you repeat on the other side and you create a 2-sided factory. It's not too hard. I break it down in my extended tutorial, which is available exclusively for members of my Patreon. So if you want that, it's only $2 and you can get immediate access, as well as a ton of other extended tutorials that I have. And it also helps me out. So there's a link in the description if you want to join the Otter Club. If so, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who already is a member of the Otter Club. Again, I couldn't do this without you. That's all I have for today. I'll see you next time.